there, listeners. Welcome to Shit That Goes On in Our Heads, the podcast where we normalize conversations around mental health.
That's right. I'm Dirty Skittles, and alongside my amazing co-host, Rex, we are here to share stories and tips from our incredible guests.
Each episode, we deep dive into struggles and triumphs of mental health, offering practical advice and heartfelt support.
Because no one should feel alone in their journey. Join us as we break the stigma and build a community of understanding and compassion.
Tune in and let's start talking about the shit that goes on in our heads. This is part 1 of a 3-part episode. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to another episode of Shit That Goes On Our Heads. I have my amazing co-host, Dirty Skittles. And today we have an awesome guest, Susan. Welcome. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I cannot wait to hear your story, Susan. Where would you like to start?
I think I should start in the beginning, just because it gives it context.
Okay, let's do it.
So I grew up a cop's daughter. When I was in my teens, my dad was a detective, and he was also my best friend. He was a very present dad, very present. And I was very close with him. He was my safety net, especially being a cop. And on Halloween of 1985, normal teenage life, I wanted to go to a party that night with my boyfriend and friends and asked my dad, and he said, absolutely not. It's a school night, not happening. And of course, grumbled and went to school. But he was actually testifying in a case that day that he was the lead detective on. And so the plan was that he was going to go to the school to pick up my 6-year-old brother from school and come home, and my mom would be home. And at that point, I would schmooze them into letting me do this. Little manipulative, I know, but, I was 17. What can you say? So I was home getting ready. My mom had just gotten home, and the phone rang. And I ran to go get it because I thought it was for me. And I picked up the phone, and it was a lady from my brother's school. And all she said was that there was a drive-by shooting and my dad was involved. And at that point, I just froze. I didn't know what to do. My mom came into the room. I just handed her the phone and kind of tried to listen in, but all I could see was her body language. And it just told me everything I needed to know. So she got off the phone and looked at me and said, we're going to the school. And I said, all right. So we went to the school, and it was nighttime by now, after 5:00. And the school has a parking lot, like in the middle of the parking lot. This is a church school. So we parked the car and headed to the back of the school. That's where they let out the kids after school care. And remember, it's nighttime. But as we were getting back there, it looked like it was daylight because there were so many police cars and the lights. And there was an ambulance in the middle of the road. And we kind of caught an eye of my dad's truck. So we started running towards the truck. And as closer we got, we saw glass on the ground and rounded the corner. And there he was, partially covered up. And at that point, I just froze again, and I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. My mom was screaming and, dropped to her knees, and she was screaming. And all I could do is hyper focus on the ambulance in the street. A couple of police officers grabbed us and escorted us into the school. And at that point, we went into an office, and I sat down on a chair. My mom got pulled aside with some detectives. I didn't know where my brother was. I didn't know if he was hurt. I had absolutely no information whatsoever. And at that point, I was just trying to comprehend everything, and it was really chaotic. So there was just so much going on around me. And there were two ladies that worked in the school that were in the office, and they were talking to each other. And the one lady said that my dad was deceased. And in that moment, my world cracked. And I wanted to jump up off that chair and run out of that room and as far as I could go. But my body felt like it was filled with cement and I couldn't move. So a little bit after that, my mom came into the room and she said, "I'm sending you with a neighbor." And I know that I wanted to run. I know I wanted to leave. But the little girl part of me wanted to be with my mom and my brother. Like I needed to be within the family unit because everything that I was experiencing, I didn't know how to navigate by myself. And I did go with the neighbor. And I felt bad for the neighbor because she knew my family for years. I was friends with their daughter. And she was trying to navigate all of her emotions and everything because there was so much going on in my neighborhood. My neighborhood was a very quiet neighborhood. And now it's filled with law enforcement. And there's helicopters overhead. The media ascended because this was a huge story. And I'm sitting on her in her living room, just inconsolable. But I had been dating a guy for 3 months, my first big boyfriend. And he was 19 at the time. And I just wanted him. I just wanted my boyfriend. So I asked her to call him at work. And she did, but she didn't give him a lot of information. So when he showed up at her door, he was like, "Grab your purse, grab your jacket. What hospital is he at? Where's your mom? Where's your brother?" All the normal questions. And I just couldn't blurt it out. I couldn't spit it out. And it wasn't until he was getting a little more persistent that we leave that I finally blurted it out. "He's gone." And he was like, "What do you mean he's gone?" And I said, "He's gone. He's not at a hospital." And I watched my 19-year-old boyfriend drop to his knees and start to sob. And back then, this was mid-'80s, there was no talk of mental health. There were no resources for kids. There was no talk of PTSD. So we were just kind of in a land of like, what do we do next? How do we navigate this? What's our next move? We don't know. We're two kids. We've never dealt with anything remotely like this. And when I finally did go home, my house was filled with strangers that I didn't know. And I just hid. I went straight to my room and I hid. Still didn't know anything about my brother. Nobody approached me. See, back then, LAPD only had systems in place to support the widow or the widowers, but not the children. So there was no advocate there for me. So I just went straight into my room and just shut the door. And I figured I would be safe in there with my boyfriend and nobody would disturb us. And we could just have a moment of silence because not only did this happen, this trauma happened, but I was not able to deal with it in private. There was always someone in my face. And little did I know at the time that we too were targets. So that's why we had so much police presence. It wasn't just because my dad was killed. It was somebody knew that we too were targets and they didn't want to take any chances. So he is now. My boyfriend back then, he left and I stayed in my room and I didn't sleep. And I could hear my brother crying. So I knew he was physically okay, but I had nothing left and I couldn't go into his room. I figured my mom would, support him the way he needed support. And I never slept. It took him 6 days to find the guys that were involved in my dad's murder. This was a planned out assassination of him in retaliation for his testimony and his investigation. So I had bodyguards. It was like a world that I never could even imagine, having police men and women in your front yard, your backyard, helicopters, bodyguards. I mean, it was nuts.
I have a question, Susan. Were you still going to school during this, or you were still going to school?
Well, I didn't go to school. I didn't go to school for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
When I did finally go back to school, because it was so in the media and so out there, kids did one of two things. They either stepped on eggshells around me. I mean, even my friends were like, don't ask her anything. Don't, they didn't know. Right. They didn't know how to deal with me. They thought if they said something, I would break into a million pieces. And they didn't want to do that to me. Or there were the kids that were like, she's been my best friend for years, you know what I mean? And talking to media and telling him those things. And I would see those recordings and going, I've never known that person a day in my life. But there was one incident where, and I talk about it in my book, I was sitting in a psychology class of all classes. And there was a kid in there that turned around and basically asked me how many bullets hit my dad.
What the fuck? Yeah.
And at that point, I stood up and ran out of the room. I was shaking. I was beside myself. And this amazing teacher, because at the time, like I told you, my mom sent me away. I was kind of pushed to the side. And even the media, like all of the focus was on my brother because my dad saved his life. And so be it, right? Like, absolutely. But I was pushed aside. And so I already felt like I didn't have any support system at home, at school. And this amazing teacher, God rest his soul, he stopped me in the hallway and he knew who I was. And he said, are you okay? What do you need? What happened? And I told him and he said, honey, kids are stupid sometimes. And stuff just flies out of their mouth before them thinking about what they're saying. And I'm so sorry that this happened to you. I mean, he totally validated my feelings. And he's like, what can I do? Do you want me to call your mom? Do you want her to come pick you up? That kind of thing. And I said, yeah, I'm done.
Yeah.
Capped.
I can't be here. So it took me a little while to get myself back into school. But even, that was my senior year. So it was very difficult just going through the normal things, But I still had my boyfriend who was my support system. I mean, most 19-year-old guys would have hightailed it out of there, given the chaos and all of the things that happened. But he stuck around. And I'm grateful to today because he knew that he'd been around my mother enough to know that I was going to need a friend, that I was going to need a support system. And so he stuck it out with me, which was fantastic. But after that, I went through all of the things that PTSD, all the gifts it leaves behind, which is I had deep depression. I had suicidal ideation, even though I didn't understand it. I just knew I wanted to be with my dad. I was in a very dark place. I was angry at God. I was angry at the world. I lived in a fog. All the things that people go through in shock and afterwards in the processing of grieving. only I had anxiety because, like I said before, my dad was my security blanket.
Right.
I felt safe with him, and now he was gone. So because I lived in a fog, I didn't know how to advocate for myself. And I didn't know how to verbalize all the things that were going on with me. Plus, I was afraid to verbalize them because I thought, oh my God, if I tell people how I'm feeling right now, they're going to stick me in a loony bin. And I didn't want that either, So my mom came to me and she said that LAPD wanted to pay for therapy for all three of us. And I was, at the time, being the kid, I was like, if you go to a therapist, that means you're nuts. Like, you're crazy. That was just my mindset, But because I was in the mindset that I was at the time, if you pushed me into a direction, that's the direction I would go. So my mom voluntold me that I was going to this therapist, and I said, all right, I'll go. I mean, maybe this is going to be an adult that can help me. And unfortunately for me, the gentleman that I saw was not willing to get into the weeds with me. I don't know if he just wasn't educated in trauma and he was terrified to go there, because he never asked me one simple question, which is, how did that night affect me? Never asked it. So every time I went to see this man, and I saw him for a year, every week I was like, this is the day. He's going to help me. He's going to help me feel better. I'm in turmoil, although I didn't know what turmoil was, but I was like, I feel crazy. I feel like everything that's going on with me, I feel like I'm out of control. So I'm hoping this guy is going to say something, do something, whatever. And it never happened. And a year later, he looked at me and said, Susan, you're a well-rounded young lady. I don't need to see you anymore. And you're going to be fine for the rest of your life. And I was like, oh, but I have all this stuff going on internally. I walked out of his office and I said, oh my God, I've cracked. I'm crazy. And even a professional can't help me. So I'm just going to have to deal with all these things by myself. I'm going to have to figure it out. And I got really good at taking in what people told me about me. So people would say things like, you're so brave, you're so strong, you're so this, you're so that. And I created what I call an emotional mask with it. I just put that sucker on. Nobody on the exterior saw all the turmoil and the crap that was going on inside of me. And I was okay with that. And I was totally fine with just not letting people in, even my boyfriend at the time didn't know all of it. Because I tried to protect him. I wanted to protect him too, which was not healthy.
So do you feel like you're more of like an extrovert or an introvert?
Now I'm an extrovert. My entire life, I was more of an introvert. In fact, I was so introverted that my parents were trying to figure out what they could do to kind of bring me out. So they threw me into modeling. And I talk about this in my book as well. They threw me into modeling. So I took modeling classes, and that was a mistake for them because I loved it. And all of a sudden I was more aware of my body. I was more aware of my looks. I was more aware of things they didn't want me to be aware of. I changed my hair, and my dad wasn't sure about that. I lost a bunch of weight and my dad wasn't sure about that either. And I remember a funny story where he took me on a boat to go diving. He was a diver. And I always wanted to go out with him. And it was a boat full of men, middle-aged men. And I had just dropped a bunch of weight and I was a blonde. And, I wore my little bikini because I could and was on the boat. And the men one of the men apparently didn't know I was his daughter and made some kind of remark, which my dad was not happy about. And he could hear kind of the talk between the men. And there was a situation where one of his partners, I was free diving while they were deep diving off of the Anacapa Islands. There's a lot of like shipwrecks and things like that. And so I was free diving, snorkeling, that kind of thing, and noticed that when his partner popped up, unbeknownst to me, but he had the bends. He had come up too fast. And I was the only one up. So I grabbed him and I had to swim sideways because the current was so bad to get him to the boat, and then there were guys on the boat. So I was able to get him up and whatever. But, after that, there was that conversation and then, it was other conversations and stuff. So we got off the boat. My dad looked at me and he goes, "You're never going with me again." And I was like, "What? I helped your partner."
Oh, man.
He's like, "That's not why."
Oh, man.
"You're never doing that again." "Nope, I can't handle it. I can't do it." I was like, "Oh." And I didn't even ask because I was clueless. I was like, what? Like, I'm trying to be helpful here.
Yeah.
He's like, "No, you're not helpful." Nope. Not on the dad's side.
Into that protector role.
The exact opposite of helpful. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So I said, you did this to me, Dad. Like, you put me in modeling school, and that made me very well aware of, taking better care of myself and eating better and, that kind of thing. You made this.
Literally.
Yeah. He was funny that way, though. He was funny that way. He wouldn't like flat out tell me, though. He was just like, "Just trust me. You're not going." Like, okay. All right.
I have a question. You mentioned something earlier that you were also trying to protect your boyfriend, like with how you were feeling. Can you like elaborate more on that? Like what did you think would happen if he knew everything?
I thought he'd split. It was definitely a situation where I was scared to lose him because I really didn't have anyone at that point. My mom, now I know, but my mom has a narcissistic personality and she kind of turtled into herself, and because all the focus was on her and my brother, she kind of wore it, I guess. And granted, I don't have any blame. I have no ill will towards her as far as how she reacted that night because it was so chaotic, sending me away and all that. It was very chaotic. However, it had consequences to that choice, to that decision for me. And, with her turtling as well, her coping mechanism was drinking, which led to more abuse. And it was, so it was difficult because my dad was always like the go-between. He was the voice of reason. And he grew up with two alcoholic parents and he was an only child. And so his feeling was, about alcohol and about all of that was, that you still needed to be there for that person, even though they anger you and frustrate you and all that stuff. And so I had that mentality. Like I took on okay, I'll just try to be a better daughter. I'll just try to do this, and it never worked. And so I lived with a lot of shame and guilt and frustration because obviously I didn't want to be abused either verbally. That was a hard part. The other side of that was because I was 17 and I was 10 years older than my brother, I kind of had to grow up very quickly and become like a secondary parent. And happens a lot. I've talked to a lot of people like that, but it's difficult. And I mean, it literally shifted my mind to like, I don't think I want kids when I get older. Not that my brother was a terrible kid, but it just was a lot of responsibility for me. And especially when she was drinking, it was like I had to like step in and be the parent and make sure he was okay and give him the support, and remember, I'm like a mess, big time. Hot mess express. That was me. And trying to be a normal teenager going through senior year, all that. And my mom can only give what she could give. So I really relied on my friends and my boyfriend a lot to kind of keep me above water.
When you were stepping in to take care of your brother, did he share what he was struggling with you at all?
No, because he was 6. So mainly his stuff was like he missed his daddy. He was sad that daddy wasn't here and that daddy was in heaven and, that kind of thing. He did have anger around it. I really didn't see a lot of his reaction or the damage caused until he got older. And even then, like, he started making some bad choices in his early teens. And I was expected to help my mother help him or like give him a talking to, which I did multiple times. But you got to get to the point where you're like, I can't talk anymore. Right. But that was that too. And now, I mean, my brother and I did not have a relationship for many years because I had to step out of it. It didn't feel healthy to me while my mom was putting me in the middle of us. She was feeding all this negative stuff to me. So I started to dislike him. And I didn't know at the time that she was pinning us against each other because she would throw what I was doing positively in his face. And then she would tell me the negative things he was doing to create this animosity between us that didn't exist. So, and we didn't learn this till like 8 years ago, where we literally sat down with each other and started to heal our relationship and started having some deep conversations around his behavior and the things that he did in his young life and kind of what my mom would do and her reactions to things. And she was a very big enabler of the behavior. She was a big instigator of the behavior. And so we literally sat down and compared notes, like, in this situation, what did mom say? Or how did she handle this or whatever? And I'm like, oh my God, he'd be like, well, she said, you said this, or, you know what I mean? And it was just like, nope, never came out of my mouth. Never. And I've always been very honest with my brother, very honest with him. But even through, living in fight or flight, which I did, and freeze, 14 years of my life after my dad was killed. I didn't seek any more therapy because I was going to be fine for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I'm so successful that first time.
Yeah.
And so I lived in fight or flight and freeze. A lot of times it was the freeze part because I tiptoe around things. I tried not to anger my mom, or I tried to make her happy all the time, or, but no matter what I do, it wasn't enough. And I understand that now. Took me 54 years to figure out my mom was a narcissist. I'm a little slow. What can you say?
But you know what? Nobody's taught in school like how to figure out if somebody's a narcissist or not. So
yeah, I didn't understand it until honestly, when I started to really understand it as I was doing the editing part of my book, because I had to reread my book over and over. And I started to realize, oh my God, our relationship has been toxic my whole life.
That's what I was going to ask.
My whole life. It wasn't just when my dad died. It was prior. And, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a jealousy because of the relationship I had with my dad. And then after my dad was killed, it was the fact that I tried desperately not to go into victim mode. I watched her drinking. I watched her, like, I say to people, like, I feel like that night I lost my dad. I lost my mom too, because she lost her identity in that moment. And to this day, she is his widow. And she likes to be in that victim mentality. And I'm my father's daughter. So there was always something deep inside of me that said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to feel that way. I don't want to feel sorry for myself because this happened. But I still didn't understand, I had all this guilt and shame and things around, like, I don't understand. What did I do wrong that my mom treats me this way? She says these things or makes me feel less than. And I got to a point in my life where I was like, we were living in Southern California at the time, and I married the boyfriend, and we had 2 kids. So now I'm a mom, and I had to break the cycle of the abuse. It was me. And because I recognized that my grandmother, my great grandmother on my mom's side were all abusive women, I had to look at the past generational abuse and say to myself, I want to do the opposite. Like, I want to be who my dad was for my children. And by any means, I am not the perfect mother. Like, I am not. I recognize that. I take responsibility for that. My husband and I, when we had our first child, my daughter, we both were like, let's take a child psychology class, because he grew up with family, and I love my in-laws, don't get me wrong, but they didn't deal with their problems. They kind of swept them under the rug. They come from the silent generation, and they were silent. And then there was my mother, who was the opposite. So we wanted to try to find out, like, what we could do collectively to be the best parents that we could be for our first kid. And in doing that, I remember taking this course, and the lady that was teaching it, she said, whatever you went through in your childhood stays in this room and does not go out that door, because you will put that on your child. And that was very poignant to me. And I said, okay. And so I tried I did a lot of work in that realm in order to not continue the behavior. And it's very easy to fall back into it. Very easy. But you have to make a choice. And I made the choice, and he made the choice to be the type of parent that we wanted. And so, that was big for me. And I don't even think, my mom started to treat my kids in the way that she treated me. And I was like, oh,
no, this is
not today.
Not today. We are not in the.
Oh, no.
We are not in the F around and find out phase of the.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we decided that it was time to move away. And I got an opportunity. I was a hairdresser at the time. I got an opportunity to come to Denver, Colorado. And at the time, I was working as a platform artist and an educator. So I wasn't behind the chair so much. I was more out teaching and coaching. And we came to Denver. I decided to shift from that and get back behind the chair. I loved it. And I was working in a salon that was very close to Littleton, Colorado. We moved here in 97. And April 20th of 1999, I was working that day, did some clients' hair, I wanted to take a quick break. So I went into the back room and turned on our little tiny TV, and up popped the live coverage of the Columbine shootings. And I stood there and froze. Now, understand, when I left California, it was because I wanted to leave all of that behind. So when I came to Colorado, I didn't tell anyone my story. Nobody knew my past. And so as I was watching the TV and seeing the coverage, I had a visceral reaction. And what was happening was I was being triggered and I didn't know it. I turned white as a ghost. I started to feel the panic attack coming on, the tingling of the fingers. My breathing was changing, all the things. And I did not know what the hell was going on. I was just like, what is happening to me? And my colleagues were confused because they're like, you're too young to have kids that go to that school. I know you don't live in the area. Like, why are you reacting like this? And I was told I was going to be fine for the rest of my life. So I didn't understand either. And colleague left the room and I did what I normally do. I put that mask back on. And I said, I don't live in the area. I don't have kids. Like, this shouldn't be affecting me. It'll be gone tomorrow. This is the play that was going on in my head. And I went out and I finished my day with my clients. Everybody around me was upset, crying, mad, you name it. And I was stoic. I just finished my day like nothing was going on, even though like everything was going on around me. And I walked out the door to my car, and everything I dealt with when I was 17 came flying back into my face. And this team, it was worse. This time it's been stuffed down for so many years that it all just flooded back. And I felt myself spiraling again. This time I know I'm an adult. I know that this is not good. And I would tell myself, like, I'll feel better tomorrow. This is just an instant reaction to the tragedies, right? But it didn't. I stopped sleeping again. And that was exacerbating the depression. It was exacerbating. Now I've got suicidal ideation again. And I'm really fighting. I'm really fighting because part of me is like, I don't want to feel this way anymore. And part of me is like, but you have babies and you can't leave them.
Mhm.
And so I was fighting and fighting. And my very smart husband recognized it. And he met me at the door and he said, you have two choices. You either go get help today or I'm putting you in a hospital.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I'm G-Rex.
And I'm Dirty Skittles.
Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. We'd love to listen to your feedback.
We can't do this without you guys.
It's okay to be not okay. Just make sure you're talking to someone.